Hello and welcome to this introductory video detailing the Government and Politics A-Level course. If you've got any specific questions that come from this, you can email the subject leader, Mr. Hannah, which is ahanna@oshsch.com if you've got any queries. But hopefully we'll be able to set you a number of different activities that you can do over the summer and make sure that you've got a clear understanding about what the course entails. So the course is from the Edexcel exam board or Pearson exam board, and we'd recommend that you spend some time having a look through the specification and before September printing a copy off ready so that you can have a look at. The course is divided into 3 different units where there's an exam for each particular component. So there's no coursework or non-exam assessment component. The first paper, so paper 1, covers UK politics and it also covers some core ideologies. Paper 2 covers the UK government as well as looking at another core ideology which is nationalism, and then finally paper 3 details comparative politics, so you need to have a good understanding of American politics and at the same time being able to compare different features and processes to their UK equivalents. So in the case of paper 1 for UK politics, the kind of things that you'll be covering will be democracy and participation, so why do certain people participate in politics and why do they vote perhaps in certain ways. It will consider questions as well like why do certain people not vote and why do some people not have the right to vote. You'll also look at political parties, so you'll be looking at the major questions that surround the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Democrat parties, as well as some of the other parties that make up the UK's party system. You'll try and work out whether or not we have a dominant 2-party, 2.5-party, multi-party system. We'll consider referendums, as the picture alludes to, so you'll have a look at the Brexit referendum of 2016, but also some previous referendums, as well as elections as a whole, and you'll have to take a keen interest in some notable elections, including the 1979, the 1997 and the 2010 general elections, amongst a number of others. In that particular paper as well, you'll also have to study the core ideologies of the major political parties in the UK. So you'll look at liberalism for the Liberal Democrats, you'll look at conservatism for the Conservative Party, and you'll look at socialism, this word that has been synonymous as a dirty word in politics, but is intrinsically linked to the Labour Party, and we'll be looking at key figures within the Labour Party in the past few years, particularly Jeremy Corbyn and currently as well Keir Starmer. The second paper will detail UK government, so you'll be looking at the UK constitution, or perhaps the lack of a codified constitution. You'll be looking at the other governmental features of the country, so why our government operates the way that it does. And in that paper as well, you'll look at another core ideology. So this one will be nationalism, which is really dominated the 21st century and perhaps the past 10-15 years for politics, and we've seen a rise in nationalist figures, so the SNP, Plaid Cymru, the Brexit Party, UKIP. We've seen a rise in nationalist parties globally as well, so you'll be concentrating on that particular ideology. Finally, we'll look at US politics. We'll try and see how this different political system, how the government and politics differs in the US compared to the UK. So you'll look at all of the processes that I've just alluded to, but you'll look at the US equivalent. So how does the US election system work? How is democracy and participation viewed in America? What are their referendum or direct democratic processes like? You will have to talk about Donald Trump, obviously. We'll have to talk about the presidency and the executive, and it's an incredibly good paper in getting you to understand the complexities of the American system, and there is a reason why when we're looking at the news that American politics tends to dominate, because as the UK is the world's leading superpower, it's really important that you understand how their political system works in order to understand perhaps the decision making or lack of decision making that takes place. The politics department is made up of Mr. Hannah, who is also a housemaster and is the subject leader for politics, also teaches history as well. Myself, I'm Mr. Raw, I am a history teacher, but if you're a history teacher, you have to almost by default have a good understanding of politics. So if you decide to study history and politics together, you'll have teachers like myself and Mr. Harris who'll be able to help you out with some of the political studies as well. With the unique elements of the department, because it is Mr. Hannah and it's a small department with a small group that tends to do politics as a subject, we see that there's quite a comfortable discussion group that takes place every single year. So politics students tend to engage with each other during the lesson, but outside of lessons they tend to congregate around each other when they've got a free period so that they can talk about these particular issues. And it's quite interesting. I have 2 history classes in year 12 going into year 13. One of them, everyone in that class does politics, and they're very close knit as a group because of the discussions that Mr. Hannah facilitates in that classroom. There's an excellent pass rate and strong track record of students that do politics, and I'll give you some examples of that in a second. And you know, we have a number of students that do politics without perhaps having a certain degree of knowledge beforehand, but then their career pathways and their career trajectories are altered as a result, and what they do is they go on to study politics, or PPE, which stands for Politics, Philosophy and Economics, and or International Relations at university. It's a very popular destination for a lot of our students. I put some testimonials on the screen there that you can have a look at, that a number of the year 12s going into year 13 have written about their politics lessons, and you can also see on the picture a number of past OSH students who attended a question time event. We encourage that every single year, and with that we also utilise contacts that we have within the school. So we have some students here who are meeting Victoria Derbyshire, who's a notable journalist, and somebody that we'd recommend you start researching into and looking at her shows and her radio broadcasts in advance. We have some of our students meeting Margot James MP in the school library there. We have some students who are meeting Lord Heseltine as well. We've had Andy Street, the West Midlands Mayor, come into school to speak to students, and we are able to utilise our network of contacts to have some of these guest political speakers either come into school or our students meeting these particular political figures. The entry requirements for politics don't have necessarily the specific subject requirements of other subjects, because politics isn't taught at GCSE level. So in order to study the subject at A level, you need to meet the school's minimum entry requirements, so that's 7 pass grades, and you need to have a subject requirement of a grade 5 in English language. That's so that you can meet the essay requirements of the course. There are a lot of essays that you need to do for politics, and that's why we'd recommend having a look at the specifications so that you can see the exam papers. The most important thing for politics, though, are these desirable traits. It's so important that if you decide to choose politics, that you're either willing to discuss and express opinions, or you're willing to get out of your comfort zone and be confident, or it's a quality that you already possess. It is a discussion and argumentative based subject. Those students that keep quiet and are reserved and don't engage with the current affairs find it really difficult. You need to make sure that you're keeping up with current affairs. You have to have some understanding of history, and that means that you're going to have to independently research. You're going to have to spend time each day watching the news, for example, listening to podcasts, doing some reading of some papers. Those desirable traits in the case of politics are almost essential, and if you don't have them at the very start, they're things that you'll have to develop quickly in order to succeed at the subject. Pathways that are related to politics. Well, politics is a classic facilitating subject in the fact that you can do so many jobs from that. You can go into some very specific jobs that relate to politics, so working in the civil service, for example, working as a social research officer, getting involved in public affairs, for example, or public relations, or being a social researcher. Politics, though, as a skill-based subject, can be used for absolutely anything. So I did politics at A level, and my class that did A level, we have a range of different subject areas that they did at university and now in careers. So I have some people who are accountants, who are architects, some are doctors. It's a subject which requires you to be analytical, requires you to be evaluative, and to think like a critical thinker should. In the past year, we've had some students that have done politics that have gone on to university level, so I've put a selection up on the screen for you here. So we've got Arjun, Tom and Dan who did politics, and you can see that the combination of subjects that they perhaps chose with politics, and you can see that, you know, for Arjun and Tom, they chose the exact same subjects, and economics, history and politics is a great combination. We have students every single year that do all three or do a combination of 2 or 3 because they do overlap. So having a good understanding of socialism as a concept and a good understanding of politics will help with certain aspects of history. Likewise, having a good understanding of economics will help you with some of the questions for government and politics. But it's not a requirement. You can see Dan, for example, did history, geography and politics as his 3 subjects, so he incorporated geography as another humanities-based subject. But it tends to be the case that students who do politics tend to combine it with other humanities-based subjects, but not exclusively. Now, for the summer, you need to ensure that you're doing 3 things. You need to ensure that you're consolidating your GCSE work, broadening your subject horizons, and those 2 things are expected for you to do, but not essential. And you need to ensure that you complete the bridging tasks that have been set for each subject area. Now, in the case of consolidating GCSE work, it's not possible to do that for politics. And there isn't necessarily an advantage to going over history, for example, if you haven't studied history before, or geography, but we would recommend having a look at essay-based subjects that you've done before. So history, geography, English language, if you can go over some of the work for that, just to keep up those essay skills, then that would be useful. The things that you can be doing, though, that Mr. Hanna would particularly like is, if you log on to Seneca, Seneca Learning Online, you can start looking at the Political Studies edXL A-level course, and you can start just getting ahead with that. But what Mr. Hanna would like you to do is, rather than consolidating your GCSE work, perhaps consolidating your understanding of current affairs right now. So he'd like you to do 3 things, and he'd like you to email that to him. Now, this is expected work, it's not essential, but if you're really wanting to make that good first impression and utilise the summer properly, then we would suggest that you do these things. So the first is, think about why an election took place in 2019 and how you might explain the Conservative victory. Now, you can do this in 2 formats. You can do an audio recording and send it through to Mr. Hanna, or you could write a 2-page account, that's about 1,000 words, explaining why you think the Conservatives were able to win that election. I think obviously there's going to have to be a reference to Brexit in there, but try and think about other reasons perhaps. Think about Boris Johnson's election as leader of the Conservative Party in 2019 and why that might have led to him calling for a general election. Secondly, try to think about how effectively the government has responded to COVID-19. So you might want to do this as a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, or you might just want to do it in 2 basic lists: positive responses, areas for improvement. That way you'll be able to identify some of the key cabinet members, and it's useful to have their names. It'll also give you a bit of an idea about how the government works, which helps for paper 2. And finally, we'd like you to do a short PowerPoint using no more than 6 slides or so, detailing who Sir Keir Starmer is and how he differs from Jeremy Corbyn. Now, these particular activities, and there's an extension one at the bottom, they are not essential, but they are expected if you are looking at the very top grades to make that jump up. And if you do these particular activities, you'll be engaging with the current affairs and starting that process ready for September. You know, if you can make that head start now, that will be a big advantage. And if you have done that, email Mr. Hanna. His email address is at the bottom with copies of your work. The other things that you can be doing is broadening your subject horizons, and if you do the previous task, you'll be broadening your subject horizons already. It's really useful to go onto the BBC News website, the BBC Politics page as well, the sub-page on that, listening to newscasts by people like Laura Kuenssberg on the coronavirus newscast. She'd previously done the Brexit cast as well, and having a look at a number of different papers. A lot of them are available online, some of them are behind paywalls. But in your family, if you've got a paper, it's always good to just pick it up and just be aware of what the current affairs are. The reason why this is so useful is when you're giving answers to papers 1, 2 and 3, the evidence that you can use can be far-reaching. So you can use, you can have a question, for example, that says how how left-wing or how socialist are the Labour Party at the moment, or it'll probably be worded more along the lines of the Labour Party are a socialist party, how far do you agree? Now if you're looking at current affairs right at this moment, then you'd be able to look at maybe some of Sir Keir Starmer's policies and compare them to socialist principles. And it might be the case that you don't know how to apply them at this particular stage, but you've got a good awareness of those current affairs. And if you can do that in preparation for September, it will be a huge advantage for you. The things which are essential for your September return to school or your September joining of the school are the bridging tasks, and what you need to do is you need to complete the task in the middle, and you need to choose 2 of the other tasks from around the outside and complete them. So the task in the middle is make a list of the reasons why the UK is considered democratic and undemocratic, and that's going to form the first few lessons that you have with Mr. Hanna. So what I would suggest that you do as a hint for that particular task is try and think about what makes something democratic, or what is democracy, and then you'll be able to form that two-sided list. Maybe consider Parliament, maybe consider our Prime Minister, maybe consider referendums or elections, okay, and they might be the basis of your particular lists. The other activities that you could do, and I'll go from the top left corner, try and think about some of those weaknesses in democracy and explain why our political system might have some of those weaknesses, and try and understand what limitations perhaps our political system has. I won't give you any hints on that one because it's a relatively short exercise. 200 words isn't long at all. You're talking about half a page of writing, so you'll have to maybe pick about one particular area and go into detail on it. Second thing that you could do, go on to the Conservative Party website and write out 5 of their key aims, the things that they want to do, and for each one try and think about whether or not you could write a critique of it. So criticising them, being critical and saying what you think about those particular policy areas, why you think they might be a mistake, what problems can you envisage with them. Try and think about Jeremy Corbyn as well and what he stands for. Even though he's not leader of the Labour Party at the moment, his reputation, his legacy is going to be felt with the Labour Party for the next few years, and it's important when you're considering questions on socialism and political parties that you have an understanding about who this political figure is. It would then be useful perhaps if you did an outline of how first past the post works. It's the election system that we use in this country in our general elections. It's a relatively short exercise and it'd be quite quick to get your head around. So it's an easy exercise for you to do, but if you have a go at that and if you've got that knowledge, it will help out all of those other elements that you look at for paper 1. So if you want to make a head start on that one, that might be useful to do. A trickier task for you to do is you might want to write an email to your MP, and there are different MPs around the Stourbridge area, so it could be different for each particular area based on their political party, but try and think about an area that's important to you right at the moment and try and get a response from them. We encourage all students to do that during their A-level studies and to engage with local politicians. We'd also like you to create a 2-page statistical report on the results of the 2017 election, not the 2019 election. 2017 general election was an unusual one in the case of how it was called and the circumstances in which it was called, so it might be useful for you to look at that one. You could instead read a broadsheet newspaper like the Times or the Guardian, take an article that you've found of interest in today and write a rebuttal, so an opinion piece. That's something that a lot of people will do with newspapers, and they'll write opinion pieces in response. It'd be a useful exercise for you to do, and 250 words is just over half a page of writing. The final task that you could choose to do is you could go to the Supreme Court website and look at the profiles of our judges. Now this would be useful for when ultimately you go towards paper 3 and comparative politics, because in America the way in which they appoint their Supreme Court justices is very different to the people in the UK. And in the case of the Supreme Court, some very interesting cases have happened in the past 2 or 3 years that have put some of these figures into the limelight. There was some very unusual headlines about a year ago about some of these Supreme Court justices in this country. It'd be useful if you had a bit of an idea about them to help you with your paper 2 studies. So those are the activities that you could choose to do. For the bridging task, you must do that middle task and 2 of them from around the outside. Hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavour about the politics course, and what we'd suggest that you do, if you've got a bit of time now before your next video, is have a look online about some of these particular areas so that you can spark that interest. Thanks very much for listening.